Hey guys, if you thought completing the square was awesome, you're going to love the quadratic formula. It's just a blast. Actually, if you like completing the square, you probably won't like the quadratic formula because you usually like one or the other. But basically what the quadratic formula is smart people took that whole 6-step process that we talked about, and what they did is they just condensed all, like smushed all 6 steps into one super complex formula. Bam, right there. So it's a good way to quickly solve for x. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a is what you need to memorize. Obviously, you need to memorize that if you want to use this. Basically, the whole idea of this is when you don't get nice numbers, when you have to have like those fractions or divide by an a. All right, the times that I use the quadratic formula is when there's an a or b is odd. All right, so the only time I use completing the square is really just when it's convenient, right? When I don't have an a and when b is even and easily split in half and squared. All right, that's when I do that. Every other time, I use the quadratic formula. However you want to do it, doesn't bother me at all though. Okay, so I'll show you how it's done. You're going to want to probably refer back to that formula, so make sure you write that down. Okay, so we're going to solve these by using the quadratic formula. Let me tell you, you would obviously check first to see if you can factor these things. Right, I'll just tell you, oh, I think this first one you might be able to factor. I'm almost positive that first one you can factor. So first one, solve it by factoring. But I'll show you that it can be done with quadratic formula. But that's why you would always check to see if you can factor, because it'll just help you be quicker and quicker and quicker. All right, so this first one. All right, I need to get everything to one side of the equation, so I'm going to subtract the 9 over. 2x squared plus 7x minus 9 equals 0. Okay, so if you can factor that, bam, go for it. It'll save you time. But otherwise, I would just decide here to use the quadratic formula instead of completing the square. The reason for that is because that 2 in front of the x squared messes with me. I don't want to divide everything by 2. That would be a disaster. And then that 7 is odd, so if I cut that in half, I'm going to get a decimal or a fraction. That's even worse, so it's just too much. So instead, I'd use the quadratic formula. Okay. So the quadratic formula just gets me right to the answer, which is really nice. But you have to memorize all that stuff. So it's x equals negative b. So b is 7. So negative b would be negative 7 plus or minus the square root of b squared. So 7 squared is 49 minus 4 times a, which is 2, the number in front of the x squared term, times c, which is negative 9, the constant. Divide the whole thing by 2 times a, which is 2. Okay, so that's the answer technically, but I obviously want to combine everything that I can combine, try to simplify as much as I can. Okay, so that negative 7 I can't really do much with. Negative 7 plus or minus. All right, the inside I get 49 minus negative 4 times 2 times negative 9. All right, so negative 4 times 2 times negative 9 comes out to 72. And 72 plus 49 is 121. Okay, you don't need to be able to do it in your head. You could obviously use a calculator on that. Then you divide the whole thing by 2 times 2, which is 4. Now, guys, square root of 121 you should recognize. Square root of 121 is 11. So this is just negative 7 plus or minus 11 over 4. Now in this case, I can actually do that. All right, negative 7 plus 11 is 4, and 4 divided by 4 is 1. So the plus 1 is just 1. For the minus 1, negative 7 minus 11 is negative 18, and negative 18 divided by 4 reduces to negative 9 over 2. So my two answers are 1 and negative 9 over 2. So just in case you look at this original problem and you can't figure out how to factor it, you can still use the quadratic formula, and you're going to get the exact same answers. Right? It's just going to come out to some really nice answers. Usually when you use the quadratic formula, you're going to have some radicals and crazy stuff like that in there. Okay? So that's how that one works. Now, number 2, this one's not going to be as nice. Okay, you can't factor this one. So subtract that x over, we get 3x squared minus x minus 1 equals 0. The reason I'm going to choose the quadratic formula here is because I have an a, so a number is starting in front of the x squared. I don't want to divide by that 3. And then the coefficient in front of the x is 1, negative 1. And I don't want to deal with that, so because it's odd. So instead, I'm going to use quadratic formula. So x equals negative b, so negative 1, which is positive 1, plus or minus the square root of b squared. Negative 1 squared is 1, minus 4 times a, 3, times c, which is negative 1. Divide the whole thing by 2 times a, which is 3. Okay, combine all this stuff. So I get x equals 1 plus or minus. On the inside of that square root, I get 1 minus negative 12, right? Negative 4 times 3 is negative 12. And then negative 12 times negative 1 is positive 12. So I get 1 plus 12, which is 13. If you can't do that in your head, like I said, use a calculator. Take some time, take some extra steps. Make sure you get it correct. And then divide that by 2 times 3, which is 6. Now, if that root 13 were to reduce, then you would definitely reduce that, right? But in this case, it doesn't, so 1 plus or minus square root of 13 over 6. That's all you got to do, okay? 3 and 4, same process. We're still going to use quadratic formula, but what we're going to do instead is round to the nearest hundredth. So I'm going to plug these things in the calculator again once I get to the end, right? I don't think any of these factor. No. Maybe number 4 might factor. Anyway, we'll check it out. Okay, so we've got to get everything to one side of the equation. 3x squared minus 5x plus 1 equals 0. That's beautiful. Terrible 3. Let's go to the quadratic formula. I don't want to divide by 3. I don't want to cut 5 in half because it's odd. So I'm going to go quadratic formula. So I get x equals negative b, positive 5, right? Because I've got a negative 5 right now. Such a bad 5. Get my stuff together. Plus or minus square root of b squared. Negative 5 squared is 25. Minus 4 times a, which is 3, times c, which is 1. All divided by 2 times a, which is 3. Alright, start simplifying. That 5 doesn't do much. Plus or minus square root. 25 minus 12 is 13. Divided by 2 times 3 is 6. Can't do anything with that. Oh, so you would leave it the same. However, I want nearest hundredth. So I gotta plug it in my calculator. Alright, so 5 plus root 5 plus root 13. I'm going to add that up first. I get 8.60 or 8.61, and then divide that by 6. So 5 plus root 13 divided by 6 comes out to 1.43. And 5 minus root 13 over 6 comes out to 0.23. Those are your two answers. Okay. Lastly, number 4 on this side. Got some stuff on the back, don't you worry. Some treats. Alright, get everything to one side of the equation. I get 4z squared minus 7z minus 2 equals 0. Almost positive this factors. So check to see if it does factor. Alright, but if you couldn't figure it out, I would go to the quadratic formula. The reason I would go to the quadratic formula is I don't want to divide by that 4, don't want to cut 7 in half. So z equals negative b, which is 7, plus or minus square root of b squared, which is 49, minus 4 times a, which is 4, times c, which is negative 2. Divide the whole thing by 2 times a. Okay, start simplifying some stuff. Z equals 7 plus or minus that square root. What's going to happen in the inside there? So that 49 is going to be added, right? Because negative 4 times positive 4 is negative 16. And then negative 16 times 2 is positive 32. And 49 plus 32 comes out to 81. 81 divided by 8. Alright, now that 81 you should recognize. Square root of 81 is 9. So this is really just 7 plus or minus 9 divided by 8. Alright, now I can actually figure out what both those things are because those are just numbers. Okay, so z equals 7 plus 9 is 16. 16 divided by 8 is 2. Told you the factors. Gosh. Alright, and 7 minus 9 is negative 2. And negative 2 divided by 8 comes out to negative 1 over 4. 2 great answers. Bam, you don't have to divide these. You don't have to round these to the nearest hundredth because they come out perfectly. Okay, second page. So the other thing that you need to work with the quadratic formula is you're going to work with what's called the discriminant. Okay, so it's this d thing. Now it looks like a weird formula, but hopefully you recognize it. It's just the part that's on the inside of the square root in the quadratic formula. So negative b plus or minus square root of. It's all this stuff that's on the inside of that. That square root, right? So what the discriminant does is it tells us what type of answers we're going to get before we even try to solve it. Okay, so if d is positive, that number on the inside of that square root, that b squared minus 4ac, if it's positive, then you get 2 irrational roots. Roots are just answers, right? 2 irrational answers. Irrational means it can't be written as a fraction or decimal. Basically, square roots. Anything that's a square root is an irrational answer. All right, if d happens to be a perfect square, then it's going to be irrational roots. All right, if d is 0, you're going to have just one answer, and if d is negative, you're going to have 0 real answers. What you actually have here, if d is negative, you do have answers, but they're called imaginary roots. They're imaginary answers. You don't want to deal with those. We'll see them in Algebra 2, but you don't have to worry about them in Algebra 1. Okay, so you need to memorize what's going to happen with d. If it's positive, 2 answers. All right, if it's 0, you have 1 answer. If it's negative, you have 0 answers. All right, and then if it happens to be positive and a perfect square, then they're rational answers. If not, they're irrational. Okay. So without solving, we don't need to solve these, determine the nature of the root. So we're just going to find the discriminant and then use what we just talked about to decide if we've got 1, 2, or 0 answers, and if they're rational or irrational. Okay, so number 1, d equals b squared, which is 64. Right, b is 8 minus 4 times a times c. All we're going to do is find that. Okay, so we get 4 times 3 is 12, and 12 times 7 is 84, so I get 64 minus 84. Okay, 64 minus 84 is negative 20. So I see a negative answer. Since d is negative, I have 0 real roots. That's all you're doing here. So simple. We're just going to crank these out really quickly. Okay, so d in number 2 equals b squared. 4 minus 4 times a times c. Alright, so I get 4. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. Negative 4 times negative 3 is positive 12. So 4 plus 12. 4 plus 12 is 16. Okay, 16 is positive, so I know I have 2 real answers. Right, anytime it's positive, 2 real answers. Now, if this is a perfect square, it's rational. If it's anything except a perfect square, it's going to be irrational. So if we know the square root of that in our heads, it's rational. So 16, we know the square root of that, so it's rational roots. All right, if that was any non-perfect square, it would be irrational. Okay, number 3. d equals b squared. 20 squared. Oh, I know what 20 squared is. 20 squared is 400. 400 minus 4 times a times c. Okay, 4 times 4 is 16, and 16 times 25 is 400. So I get equals 400 minus 400, which is 0. When your answer is 0, you have 1 real rational root. Okay, 1 real rational answer. Number 4. This time we need to move that 4x over, so it's 4x squared plus 4x plus 1 equals 0. Now I have this set up so I can find the discriminant. d equals b squared minus 4 times a times c. This is convenient. 16 minus 16 equals 0. So it's, once again, 1 real rational. 1 real rational. That's beautiful handwriting. Gosh, I'm good. All right, number 5. For number 5, we've got everything set up, so I go straight to the discriminant. b squared minus 4 times a times c. Okay, so I got 49 plus 8, which comes out to 57. Oh, that's not a 5, is it? That's not a very good 5. 57. Okay, 57, not a perfect square. It's positive. So this is positive. I know I've got 2 real, but it's not a perfect square, so it's going to be irrational answers. Guys, that's it for the chapter.